Guess what, bitch? Coronavirus! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Government!
To have a national emergency is a huge deal. That means whatever is going on is affecting all of us, and it takes a lot to greatly impact us in that way. They look at a lot of different things. Economics is one of the biggest things that they look at to determine whether this is a national situation. And one of the biggest impacts that we clearly could see was the stock market crashing. That was a big sign to say that nationally, on an economic level, we're in trouble. And then it wasn't just that. And then it quickly could not, bounce back because the problem was not solved. And so that was one of the contributing factors to saying we're in an emergency. Another thing is the public health and the public safety. When it gets to a certain point, there can be outbreaks on different levels. I'm going to share with you all a personal story of mine. When my son was just a car seat baby, I allowed him to attend a daycare. And the daycare was more like a learning center or a school. They were a part of a church. They were a big staple in the community, very well known, very respected. I mean, decades of service to the community. And they had a small, daycare part, and I remember signing my kids up, taking a tour, just really getting a good understanding of everything that they offered the kids on whatever level. And so at that time, my youngest son, who I now know he's autistic, but at that time he was a car seat baby and none of that was discovered. We did not know. He was probably not even 1 year old at this time. And so I worked on the opposite side of town, but the school was very close to my home where I lived at that time with my mom. And so I would just take them every morning, very early in the morning. I would be one of the first parents. And my two sons, I have an older son that he's 2 years older. And so he would go in one place, and then my baby boy at the time would go into another room. And I would always take my baby last. And so I would take him back to where those assigned children were. And there was this one lady who really, really loved my son. And so she would have her arms wide open for him every single time I brought him in. And when I came to pick him up, he would still be in her arms and she would be rocking him and I'm like, every single time I would joke with her, like, my baby is going to be spoiled. You always rocking him. But on the real, I loved it. I loved how much she loved my baby. That made me feel assured that she's going to make sure that he's good. These ladies were older. They were more seasoned. They just had that touch with the kids, that right amount of sternness and amount of comfort and love that I felt so comfortable with leaving my children with them. And so time passed and everything was good. And on the weekends, I did a little side hustle, such as selling Avon, selling Mary Kay products, and selling purses and handbags. And so I set up at this one plaza. It was a store called Acceptance Insurance. And most of the desks there were designated to the insurance representatives. And they had one desk that was empty. And I guess I made good friends with those ladies, and they offered me that desk to sell my products. And so on the weekends, like Friday and Saturday, after I guess I got off of work, and Saturday most of the day, I would sit up there with my stuff. So one particular Saturday, I'm just sitting there selling my things. And so one of the daycare ladies came in, and she was younger, but she was more like an assistant to them. And so I said, where you been at? I haven't seen you. And so she had this look on her face. And I just thought back to when I asked about her, because I didn't see her for a minute. And I specifically remember asking, like, where is such and such, and them just, blowing me off kind of. But I wasn't really trying to know where she was at. I was just trying to show a little concern. But when they weren't forthcoming, I just threw my hands up like, well, it ain't my business. I'm not worried about it. And I went on about my business. But seeing her, I'm like, well, where you been at? I've been asking about you. I'm halfway joking, but I'm halfway serious. And she was like, your baby's still there. Get your babies out that daycare now. So, my heart hit the floor. I'm like, what you talking about? And so she's like, there's a woman there that's very, very sick. She grabbed my arm. She was like, get your baby out of there right now. I'm like, very sick, like what? What are you talking about? She was like, you need to get your babies out. That lady that's in there with your son has tuberculosis. And so I said, what? I said, oh my God, because I knew what tuberculosis was, because, if you grew up, that's one of the shots that they tell you they have to take. I can remember getting that shot as a child in school, when there would be maybe an outbreak or something, and they have to give you that test, see if that bump comes up, and if something comes up, you have to take another test and whatever. So I was fully aware of how contagious it was and the seriousness of it, but that's as far as my information went. As far as what it really does and how it affects you and all of that type of stuff, I was not aware of all of those things, but I became very aware. So, it didn't take nothing. I packed up my stuff. I was like, I got to see what's going on. So I went straight home. And at that time, I stayed with my mom and her husband. And I came in and I was like, Mama, they're saying that one of the daycare ladies has tuberculosis. And they're not really trying to tell us, blah, 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 blah. So let me tell y'all something. For y'all that don't know, my mama, Brenda, when I tell you, you tell her stuff like this, she just taking it to the straight max. But I was so concerned at that time. I was grateful for, her kind of like taking charge and just saying, this is what we're going to do. And so, she's like, well, the fact that they're not even going to say anything, not even going to tell us, that's not cool or whatever. So I think we waited till Monday to try to contact the school and ask them about it. And the lady kind of shrugged it off. And she kind of confirmed it with me, but she was still like, everything's fine. She's going to be fine. And so I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? And so, I ended up not taking my kids up there. And I was like, I know I have to let them know what I'm going to do, because I had like a childcare voucher, and you can't miss too many days or they'll kick you out of the program. So I'm trying to make decisions with all of this on my mind. I'm trying to make decisions about my child's health, about it being contagious, about my job, about, losing my childcare voucher, or just about my whole life getting ready to turn upside down, basically. And so when we got that response from them, I'm like, okay, now what should I do next? And the first thing was, of course, let me check and make sure my child is okay. And so when I called the doctor and was letting them know, they was like, you can't bring them in. You're going to have to get the health department involved. And so now the health department is getting involved, and they want to send him to their own set of doctors. And so that happened. And when they got the result that it was a positive result, and so now everything is just going to the next step. They want more information. What daycare is this? Where is this happening? Blah, blah, blah. All of the questions. And it was just a big deal all of a sudden. And so in the process of me letting them know what I knew and how much I was not informed, that escalated things to another level, because they were like, all these kids are now involved. This is a daycare, and, they could be sick and then they don't even know it. And as was my son, once we got really deep into the testing, more things was revealed. And when I look back over certain things, I had took him to the hospital a couple of times because we were thinking he was having ear infections. He was just more whiny. He looked like he was rubbing his ears. And so there was a time when a lot of doctors was very free-handed with antibiotics. You come in with something, it's an ear infection. Here goes some antibiotics. Send you on your way. And that's what the doctor was doing, when the whole time it was not that. It was, he had been exposed to tuberculosis and nothing was being done to help make him better. And so once that happened and he was officially diagnosed with being exposed to it, my life had to completely stop. I had to be tested. My son was tested. My mom was tested. Her husband was tested. His kids had to be tested because they would come to the house. His grandkids had to be tested because they would come to the house, play with my kids. Everybody that I had been in contact with, I basically had to make a list and let them know, and they had to be informed, and they had to be brought to the health department to get testing, and a lot of them came up positive. And so it stopped a lot of people's lives within my circle. And so during the course of that time, my mom is very proactive in the community. She's always had a voice in the community and known what to do to get her voice heard. And so we both drafted a letter to write to each news channel, and she looked up each person that she thought would, take the story. She didn't just send it to everybody. She kind of did research on each of the news reporters, looked at some of the stories that they had previously put out, and then we were making decisions like, oh, that person would probably be interested in it or whatever. And so we sent it to several news channels and several news reporters. And so we just got calls back. We just got calls, and the news started to come out. The news started to contact the daycare. And then finally we got a letter from the daycare stating we had to take our kids to the health department. We had already done that, but they now were trying to do the right thing and let other parents know, because they didn't even know yet. So, it was just a big deal, but that's how that happens. There's an exposure, and what happened was the actual daycare lady that loved my child so much had full-blown tuberculosis. When they finally got a hold of her, she was completely quarantined. She had to totally stay in the hospital. There was another baby in the room that was totally put into the hospital. The baby was in the hospital for there was 9 months of treatment required for each person that had exposure on my son's level. Not every child had exposure on a certain level where they needed the same things. There were some children that had to stay in the hospital. My son was not one of those children. When they gave the first test, it came positive. When they went to the next step of testing, it came back negative, and so therefore he didn't have to go into the hospital, but he had to stay home until he was cleared to do anything else. And so was I, and so was my son, and our lives basically had to stop, and I had to let my job know, and it was up to them whether they would keep me, because I worked at a hotel, which was not one of those jobs where you're kind of like in contract with people where they have to keep you around. It's like, you're not here, we got to hire somebody else because your job still has to be fulfilled. Well, now if they get to liking who they have, when it's time for me to come back, they may put me back on a schedule part-time. My hours, my times may be different, even though I fought for a front desk time slot that was beneficial for me and my children. And so now I've kind of lost that, and I could go to hours that are not beneficial for me and my children. So all of those things was happening at that time, and it was very stressful, and I didn't know what to do. But I thank God, you know, for my mom being there for me, having that time, and having to happen to be back home with her, because I had just recently came back to living with her, because I just became down on my luck at a point in time in my life. And I'm glad she was there with the extra room that me and my kids could come back in, and I could rebuild my life. And that's what I was in the process of doing. And this kind of slowed it down further, because I lost a lot of time that I could have been working, building, saving, whatever, you know. So it did put my life on hold for a substantial amount of time. And I had to get so many clearances for my children to even enter into daycare. And even up until this point, when they're tested for TB, we always show up with the first sign, and we have to go to the next steps. We've always had to do it. Every single time he's tested, he tests positive. No matter what has been shown in the past, you have to take this second test for them to get that as a negative before they clear you, such as when it's time for him to get shots, and you have to be cleared to go to the next grade, and all of those types of things. These are the things I've had to be used to for the rest of his life. And that happened when he was a little baby. And so I say all of that to show you how these types of things can affect your life, but how they've impacted certain pockets of the community. But because of the things that we've had in place to contain things, for there to be immediate steps in certain positions. Oh, it's in a position of, it's in a daycare around kids. We have a plan to put in place and to activate, to contain it, to get a hold of it, so that it does not go outside this county, so it does not leave this city, so it does not leave this state. Okay, so our leadership plays a huge role in why this particular time is different versus other times.
Come up in the spot looking extra fly. For the day I die, I'm a
Guess what?